Well, howdy, everybody. As you may or may not have heard by now, my planned hike of the Uinta Highline Trail is postponed. The Balula fire has closed a pretty significant portion of the western end of the trail and has closed the western terminus. So, our original plan had us leaving a vehicle at the western terminus, shuttling to the eastern terminus, and hiking back to the car that we had left. With that western terminus closed, we can no longer leave a vehicle there. So logistically, things get very, very complicated. In addition to that, I don't want to be the guy that hikes through a fire closure. To me, that's not the image I want to present. That's not the person I want to be. So if the people fighting the fire say that this section of the trail is closed, in my mind, that's kind of the end of the discussion. So we're pivoting and we're coming up with a new plan. Now, when we first heard about the fire closure, I immediately went to work. Okay, so we can't do this. What are we going to do in this time frame? Because we've taken the time off work already. We've got all these plans. We've gotten that level of excitement that you get when you're planning a trip, and I don't want all of that to just dissipate. So immediately in my mind, I went to what else can we do? We'll do the Highline Trail next year or the year after or whenever it's appropriate, but what do we do this year? What's our big end of the season trip? So we came up with 3 different route possibilities. My buddy Brian, who you've seen in several videos, and my friend Devin from Backcountry Exposure are both coming along on this trip, and they were coming along on the Highline Trail as well. So Brian came up with 2 routes in the Sierras, and then Devin and I kind of worked out an idea for the Sawtooth Wilderness in Idaho. And the 2 Sierra trips were dependent on the elusive walk-in permit. Because this late in the game, trying to get into the Sierras, if you didn't get your permit at the time when all the permits were originally released, you're kind of boned. And you just sort of have to wait for them to release these walk-in permits. So Brian got up bright and early and sat at his computer with his cup of coffee and tried to get us a permit. So, as luck would have it, we got our first choice. So the trip we'll be doing now is kind of a variation of the North Lake to South Lake loop, which we have done before. Brian and I did that trip, and I'll drop a link in the description of this video to the 2 videos that I made of that trip. Our trip is slightly different. We'll be going in a different trailhead, and we'll be going up over Alpine Coal instead of Lamarck Coal, and down into the Darwin Basin, down into the Evolution Valley. And then instead of exiting at Bishop Pass and going to South Lake, we're going to continue along the JMT and go over Mather Pass, which I've never been over, so I'm very excited about that, and exit a little further down the trail. So a few things have to change. I did just make a gear loadout video for all the things I'd be carrying on the Uinta Highline Trail. And for the most part, that's going to stay the same. One major notable exception is I have to carry a bear can now. Well, all 3 of us have to carry bear cans now. They're required in the area that we're traveling. So that adds a significant amount of weight to my pack. This trip is a couple days shorter. The Uinta Highline Trail was going to be 7 days. We're going to travel 105 miles in 7 days. This trip is about 62 to 63 miles. So we've got a 5-day window. So we've got 2 days less food to start out with. So that's a little bit lighter. But then we add the not insignificant weight of a bear canister. So we'll be starting the trip with a 5-day food carry in a bear can. Not my favorite, but you got to do what you got to do. One other change I'm going to be making is that for the Highline Trail, I was only bringing one insulation layer because we were going to be walking these big, epic, 16 to 20 mile days, and I wouldn't really need additional insulation layers for hanging out around the campsite, because if I got cold, I would just climb into my quilt and go to bed. Due to the terrain and just the way this trip is routed, we may have shorter mileage days, which would give us a little more time to hang out and relax at the campsite. So I'm adding a mid layer. It's just a grid fleece. And it's one of my favorite pieces of gear, and it's kind of a funny story. Years and years ago, Old Navy was trying to dip into the outdoor adventure market. They were trying to compete with like Patagonia and these other companies. So they made their own line of like grid fleece and high performance, quick drying shirts and all these things. And ultimately their outdoor line failed. And so they put all the stuff on a clearance rack. So my wife and I were in Old Navy. Here was this clearance rack of all this outdoor themed gear, like this high performance outdoor gear that they were trying to get rid of. And they were having a sale. It was 70% off all their clearance items. So I got this grid fleece, which it's comparable to like the Patagonia R1 or something in that vein. And it was like $1.80. And I've had it for 8 or 9 years now, taking it on tons of trips. It's super comfortable. It's a great mid layer, and it only weighs 11 ounces, which is pretty nice for a grid fleece. So I'm going to add that to my kit, if I need a little bit of extra warmth while we're hanging out around the campsite and just talking and having a good old time. And it's also something I could sleep in if the night gets colder than I'm comfortable with, because I think with the addition of the bear canister, I might swap out my 20-degree quilt for my 30-degree quilt, because I am carrying the Nemo Tensor all-season pad, which is like a 5.2 R-value pad. It's a very, very warm pad. So I think I can get away with the 30-degree quilt, the warmer pad, and then just some extra base layers to sleep in. I'm going to wait until we get a little closer to the trip and keep an eye on the weather reports and make sure that I'm not setting myself up for failure. But the plan as it stands now is to bring that 30-degree quilt and leave the 20 at home. If the weather looks like it's not gonna work out, then I'll carry the 20-degree as well and just deal with the extra weight, because I'd rather have a slightly heavier pack than have 4 miserable nights in the woods. So that is where we're at. Highline Trail is postponed until next year. The Sierras is go for this year. I'm excited for a number of reasons. I'm excited. There is some overlap from this trip and our last trip, but the areas that we're overlapping are some of the most beautiful places I've ever walked. So I'm very excited to see these places again. I'm also very excited to see the new areas and to go over Mather Pass, which is something I've never done. But the thing that has me the most excited, the thing that will probably be the focus of my videos for this trip, is that this is Devin's first time visiting the Sierras. And Brian and I get to introduce him to the Sierras, to our backyard, to an area that has essentially been our backpacking playground for the last 4 or 5 years. We've done a ton of trips up into this part of the Sierras, and being able to introduce my friend to this area for the first time, this area that means so much to me, is very, very exciting. So I'm really, really looking forward to this trip. And even though it's replacing a trip that I was very excited about, it doesn't feel like a consolation prize. It doesn't feel like a second choice. Like, I'm just as excited to do this hike as I was to do the Highline Trail, and we can just do the Highline Trail another time. Well, that is all I have for you today, and we will talk again soon.